Yeah, I know. Another video in a month. Maybe Andy's actually back to BookTube. Maybe not. But here's what I do know is I just finished an excellent fantasy sequel. Scarlet Tides by David Hare is the second book in the Moontide Quartet. If you missed my last video, I went over how much I loved that video and begging you who are watching this video to pick up the Moontide Quartet and read it, because it is so far, I'm only 50% of the way through, like, the best series that I have never heard anyone else talk about on BookTube yet. Now, since then, I have found out that Kitty G a couple years ago did do some great reviews, so you can also check out hers if you want a second opinion. But I would just recommend everyone out there pick up this series. It's so great. So I was thinking about doing a review of this second book, but reviews for sequels don't really do well as far as like views. But also I understand, because if you haven't seen the first one, you're not going to click on a review of the second one because you don't want to get spoiled, and I totally understand that. So rather than do that, I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is what makes a fantasy sequel good. And because I've had it a lot of times, and I'm sure many of you have, where you enjoy the first book and then the next sequel is okay, but you keep going on. And then a series gets steadily and steadily worse. It just doesn't reach the highs of that first book, or maybe even the first couple. And I wanted to think about broadly what I think a good fantasy makes, and using David Hare, my recent experience with this second book that I wasn't expecting to be as good as it was, to help me think through that. So I'm just going to go through two very overarching things that I think make a good sequel, and I want to see if you guys agree. And then, by the way, at the end of the video, I will have a spoiler discussion of the second book in the Moontide Quartet, because I really want to talk about it, but I'll give a huge warning so you guys can click off before I start talking spoilers. So here we go. Two things that I think make a good fantasy sequel. And these are obviously going to be broad, but I think I just wanted to discuss it. First, you have to continue doing what readers liked in the first book. Now, this is pretty obvious. I think everyone would agree with this. If where this author really excelled is unique character perspectives or something interesting, that should continue to happen. If what a reader really loved is this very unique, fun world, that world should still be part of the book itself. If the author's really good at action sequences, obviously there should be action sequences in the second book. If there is a great intrigue and battle between like different factions within a government or a certain unit of military or whatever, those elements should still be there. You can't just like change immediately what is happening from book to book. I've been in series where the first book I loved for a certain kind of something, and the next book tried to kind of reinvent itself, and it's like, why are you doing that? I liked this first book. Now, I need to mention the second thing before talking more in depth about that first element, because these two elements that I'm talking about really have to be in concert with each other. Because the second thing is, don't repeat beats. And these two things I think are always warring inside of people who are writing sequels. You have to continue to do things that you do well and the reader does well, but you can't repeat beats. Characters have to grow. They can't go through the same journey that you already put them through in the previous book. Plots have to progress. Like, while you might have done really good intrigue, you can't just have the same intrigue in the same space around the same thing. The whole first book was about the line of succession, and there was this successful, or at least, something happened with that line of succession. You can't immediately just do a whole other book on the line of succession. That might be somewhat interesting, but it's really not going to last and pull along the reader in the same way. If you are really good at action, you can't just have a second book that is all action. It's going to get repetitive. It's going to get stale. You have to continue to respect your reader enough to continue on things that have happened. Now, I'll name some names of books that I think do this well and do this not well. Actually, let's just start with the Stormlight Archive, because you guys know I'm sort of hot and cold on that series as a whole. In some ways, Brandon Sanderson is a master of this. He does what he does really well, like interesting magic systems, character plots that are interesting and new and feel unique. I have found, specifically with Stormlight Archive, and some of even his larger stories, like Mistborn Era 2, the longer they go, the less feels like this is stuff that he does really well, and more it seems like similar beats with some of his major characters. That's why I think, for example, Oathbringer and Rhythm of War are much worse books than The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, because I think those beats are starting to get hit a lot with some of the extra, especially the main kind of 2 or 3 characters. You can look at my reviews of those books if you want more specifics of that, but there are some things that I find very, very frustrating. Classic case of sequels that do well. The Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now I know, blah, blah, it's supposed to be one book, blah, 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 but most people see them as 3 separate books, right? And think about each book in that series and what people like about it. Obviously the beautiful writing style of J.R.R. Tolkien goes without saying, but just elements of the story itself. People like the slow, purposeful pace. At least that's something that I really enjoy, of this journeying theme of like things going places, and the depth of Middle World. Every place you go, whether it is Hobbiton, the Shire, then you go to Bree, and then Rivendell, and you kind of continue to go. All these places feel just deep and strong and have a rich history that all feel unique. That's something that people who read Fellowship of the Ring will absolutely love, along with characters and the sort of fun classic tropes that each character inhibits, whether it is the graceful elf of Legolas or sort of the gruff Gimli, kingly Aragorn. You know, there are these pieces of mythology that sort of come to life in this new place and continually move. Well, the second book, Two Towers, does all of that again, but it is different. It's not the same beats. It's not just running from ring wraiths. Now we have 2 separate groups, but in their new locations, right? Rohan, Gondor, and then there's Frodo and Sam with Gollum, but it's still similar, right? Everyone's still moving, there's still sort of this quest, and it's all sort of classical, and you're in new places, but they also have this depth of feel, but none of them are the same. Just to use like men as a very different, like Gondor and Rohan are very, very distinct, and the clashes and plot contrivances of how those kings or stewards interact with our heroes are incredibly different and new and different. Characters grow. Merry and Pippin are very interesting characters in Fellowship of the Ring, somewhat comedic at times, but as you get towards the latter groups, they grow and they mature and they realize that they have to take personal stake in this world. Then the third book, of course, ups that again. Now, Frodo and Sam and Gollum, yes, are still traveling, but are now in some really crazy areas in Mordor, like the extreme. And now Aragorn is king. He's returned to Gondor, but there's this whole, you know, they win Pelennor Fields, but then they have to go. It's just a continual movement while staying the same. And it is a hard thing to do, but I think that's how you write a fantasy novel. I'm specifically being incredibly broad here because every book, every fantasy book is different and people like it for different reasons. But I do think consistently throughout those are these 2 main factors. That's really a continuum that is warring and having to find a balance between doing what brought success in the first place, what people really liked in the first one, continue to make that and do that well, while also not treading on the same ground and introducing more elements. So what do you think of those 2 things? And specifically in the comments, let me know a couple series examples that you think does this really well and maybe does it really poorly. I think that'll be a really interesting discussion in the comments below. And now, just the last part of this video, I'm going to do a quick spoiler review of Scarlet Tides, the second book in the Moontide Quartet, which you should definitely read. So, spoiler alert! Scarlet Tides is amazing. I gave it 5 stars. I think it is better than the first one, expands on things really well, and continues to do what it does well. Since it's part of this video, I'll use that kind of 2-tier structure that I just talked about, doing same things well and not repeating beats, as why I think Scarlet Tides is an excellent fantasy sequel. So why did I like Moontide Quartet? I loved this expansive world that felt close to ours, but different enough that I was exploring and finding more out every chapter that I read. So this world, like the stuff we know, is still very important. It's this foundation that was built on, like the Crusades and the Empire and the history of the Empire, the rise of Cornelius, all the stuff. But then it's all been built on in such beautiful ways. So I just made a list of stuff off the top of my head as I was thinking about this book that like we didn't know about in the first book, or at least knew very little about, that became really interesting facets and added to the world in this one. Soul Drinkers. It was like slightly talked about, obviously at the end with Kazim. All of a sudden we got so much more. The Animages and this whole like flock or herd of these Animages who are lions. Political world of Kesh, the Sultan, how those different aspects interact with each other. We really didn't get much of that outside of Havon in Antioquia. How actual armies work of the Crusades and how mages work into the hierarchy. I read one review that said people didn't really love Ramon's storyline. I loved that. I thought that was unique, something we didn't get last time, and gave us a view of the Crusades while other places were just talking about the Crusades. Lamali, if I'm saying that right, the snake people, and just like how constructs can get used. Obviously that is going to become more prominent because we found out about how they're like making these constructs more intelligent by stealing souls of people. Tides. This is one thing that actually bothered me in the first one that I thought like, oh, it's fantasy world. This is one overview. Talking about how the seas and the tides are so crazy and it can't be passed by boats. I was like, that would be like really nuts. Like at the place where the sea meets the earth, right? Like there would be the floodplains or whatever else. Like how would that even work? And this book talked about that as we went through Alaron's movements of like, yeah, for like hundreds, I don't know if it says hundreds, but for like miles inland, there's like no one can live there because the extreme tides. So I just loved that aspect of it, and like communities that lived along those areas. The Inquisition is something we heard about, but we didn't know a lot about, and Malivorn gives us like this insight into it. What worked is this interesting world and continued to make it work, expanding it. And same thing, one thing in my review I say over and over again is these unique character beats, which this book absolutely has, along with the first one, and actually gives us more. Like one of the best ways to continue that tradition is one, to progress the storyline, and I'll get to a second, but all of our characters had major progressions, and like that opened up the reader's understanding of those characters and what's happening, but also added some really interesting ones. I already mentioned two of my favorites, which is Ramon and Darvian. I never really quite know how to say his name, or Malivorn, whatever, the Inquisition guy. Those two perspectives give us so much in this book and help us understand overall the plot well while not forsaking our older characters. But two, and what I love so much about this is that this book does not repeat any of the beats of the past book. Everything moves forward. Everything continues to push, plot wise, character wise, like even magic wise. Like our understanding of the system just like plows ahead without having to like re-up some stuff, which was wonderful. I'm just gonna go through again the characters because I think each of them make huge roads. Like Alaron, now like he's the scared boy who like doesn't make progress, and that's kind of his whole character for most of the first book. But in this book, he's forced to take on not necessarily leadership because there's still it's kind of pushed by circumstances, but his competence improves. He gains a little confidence in himself, but it's not a switch overnight. He's not like all of a sudden Anton Maros or whatever, but like he's gaining some more confidence. He's subtly becoming this more competent character, and we see that work its way out in his dealings with the Lamali, but also with Sim. And his view of Sim, really, he still has this crush on her, he still loves her in many ways, but like he doesn't revert to trying to like fall in love with her. It's not like a redo of that. He sort of understood that and moved forward, which makes him a much more interesting character to know what is he going to do with that part of his personality that he obviously like wants to find this connecting person. I'm a little excited that maybe he and Ramita's plot means they will get together, but I don't know. I could also see that just being a great friendship. Great. Ramon was like this joker, never took anything seriously, and now all of a sudden is thrust into leadership in an army and learning how both to like have his own morality and what he believes in as a provincial and how the empire works and that this crusade is wrong, while also wanting to protect his troops and finding himself in this area, and he has to do the best to do it. And I love the ending of this book, finding him as a military commander and seeing how he's going to go there. And also him overcoming some of his own personal prejudice, people who are part of this empire with his girlfriend, which I forget the name of. I think that's going to be developed a lot more in the next book because that's kind of service level in this. Like they seem to be just like needing each other for physical comfort. We'll see if that develops into an actual relationship or not. But Ramon, unique, and he changes. Elena and Kazim, I cannot say enough about how much I love this storyline. Kazim struggled for a long time. This is a big book with, what he's done, both with the murder, but also what he's done with Ramita, and also like his understanding of religion and extremism. But that's not just like who he is for the rest of the series. Like he struggles with this and then makes a decision towards the end when Elena is being attacked. But that decision doesn't sit well with him. He's not just changed overnight. Like, just love all of that so much. And he and Elena's relationship, the discussion between them, how it's never easy, how there is like this continual tension, but also there's a temptation in the storyline to just not have them tell things to each other, and that causes conflict, especially that he is a soul drinker. Like for a long time, that's like, is he going to tell her or not? Many books, honestly, would just have like that as like a will they, won't they for a long time, maybe for books on end. But like within a couple chapters, he fesses up to it. They have that moment where they come together and talk. I love that. So much to say there. And their relationship building like this loving connection makes so much sense for their character development. Like Elena had like opened herself up and had been hurt, but she doesn't just revert to like, I'm now not going to trust anyone, which is like an easy decision that a lot of authors would make. But now Elena is thoughtful and like, well, was it this one time? Why did Sarah betray? Like she's struggling with this. And all of her character development that she was with, I'm forgetting the name of the younger guy that she had a relationship with in the last book, where she started to believe in like a life outside of politics and assassinations and all of that, it doesn't just go away because that guy died and she just wants revenge and that's the end of it. She still has that part of her that is now grown. And so she sees that in Kazim, and it kind of prepared the way where she could view this potential enemy as a person, and that opens the way to their connection. And this whole storyline just gives us a lot of interesting information about mages and how they train, making Kazim this interesting I love all of it. Fantastic. Just like couldn't stop reading this storyline. Incredible. Ramita, finding out that it's not just like she's not just barefoot and pregnant and like waiting for these children, like she's actually potentially like the person who's going to change everything. And all of the moments of her realizing her power, learning her power with Justinia, where she stops Justinia's slap. So cool. Her moment at the end where she's able to kill the Inquisitor easily. Like this view that like she is becoming this ascendant power. And what could that mean? I think just so exciting. And she has now changed from this scared girl to really this like woman who makes decisive actions, who cares for people deeply, but also is a realist. She's educated now. She's educated herself. Like, it's so great. Ramita is a great character, and I'm so excited to see her take, I think, a more central role in the next two books. And finally, I have to talk about Sarah and her storyline, because I was so frustrated with her at the end of last book, and what that choice she made to betray Elena. And what is wonderful about this book is that she moves on from that. She's distraught by it, but she continues on. And this awakening of her own sexuality as a lesbian, who not only like is that something for her to really wrestle with and figure out her identity along with that. And I actually really liked the bond between her and the redheaded woman that I'm forgetting her name. I'm so sorry. The other wife of Dorabon. It made more sense of why she did make the chance or the choice to betray Elena, because if in the last one there was like this weird thing where she was jealous of Elena and the younger lover that she had, and I was like, why does she care so much about this? And now in reflection, it is that she had actual like a romantic crush on Elena that wasn't reciprocated in some way, and that fed into her being a slightly immature girl still in some ways, while also being a very competent ruler, led to this decision. And that's what Gervin Guile kind of pushed that we didn't understand, and her realizing how to use that to her advantage. I mean, all of this is just like, it's a different story. It's not the same beats. Things have changed, but the things that worked continue to work. I just love Scarlet Tides. 5 out of 5. Please read Moontide Quartet. If you've watched this, I'm sure you've already reading Moontide Quartet, but I'm going to continue to read them. Thanks for watching. First in, last out.